Okay, it is great to be here, and we've heard some wonderful talks, inspiring talks. I see one of my roles as asking uncomfortable questions, just making things a little interesting. So let's talk about money in the capitalist system. And I should say, just as a little bit of background, I studied Marxism in college. I hung out with a bunch of lefties who, gave me a heavy dose of the inherent exploitative nature of capitalism. And as far as I can tell, you are all very successful capitalists. So I just have a general question, really, to any of you. Do you feel at all guilty about making money? Did anyone want to take that?
I don't feel guilty about making money. Matter of fact, my finance team, tells me we're not making enough money. So that's, I need to sometimes focus more on making the money instead of revolutionizing the way the world eats to keep our business continuing. But the more profit then allows us to do more things and invest in new products, and the more we sell, the more money we can give away. But so I personally don't have a guilt about making money.
So no guilt at all. I mean, the more money, the better.
I would say one thing is let's say not necessarily the money. I do feel a responsibility that as a company that has 100+ employees and ships products all over the world, and there's a downside in the food business today is that the packaging options are limited. So we're selling an organic food product in packaging that's not recyclable, and that's a tough reality that I have to deal with. I'm part of a group in the Bay Area called OSC2, and we're different organic companies work together, and we have a packaging initiative, and so we're working on compostable packaging that's grown from trees and that you can compost it. But in terms of more money is better. Actually, I kind of started out really as a lot of my younger career as an environmentalist, and I was always fighting. Like I was part of an organization to try to ban clear cutting in California in 1990, and we had very little money, and the timber industry spent $50 million, and we raised $6 million. So we were always kind of on the short end of the stick of not having enough money as an environmental activist, and so I kind of decided, hey, how about if I can go out and make a lot more money, and then I can fund some of my environmental activities.
Okay, so Chip, let me turn to you.
Well, I think it's like asking the question, do you feel guilty having all that extra time in your life or all that extra happiness? I think it's not so much whether you have it, it's how you made it and what you do with it. I don't actually think money is inherently evil. I think the way people make money and then what they do with it can be. So I don't think that. I think what, and so I would be. I guess I would be more of a conscious capitalist or a karmic capitalist than a Marxist necessarily. But I guess and frankly, having spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union pre the Soviet Union fall, I mean, I can see that even in a Marxist society, there are a lot of ways you can abuse people without having finances involved. There was a lot of emotional abuse going on in that country. So what I will say is that I was somebody who, by traditional measure, was doing fine. But I was, relative to my Stanford MBA classmates, to people who were sort of my peer set in the Bay Area, until I was 50 years old, I had a very impressive title, lots of fame, a few books, but I didn't have I'd never had more than about $50,000 in the bank. So, and that's true. I did not, and you can ask anybody who was in my world, they knew I just didn't have a whole lot of money. So what I made would go back into the business. I would take salary sabbaticals for 3.5 years. So money was not the reason that I became an entrepreneur. It had nothing to do with it. Strangely, in the last 6 years, I sold my company, sold a few hotels. I joined Airbnb. The value went through the roof. So now I'm a wealthy man, and I don't act in any way differently than I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Do you feel any responsibility has come of that
Completely.
now that you have a lot more?
Yeah, no, and I've made large donations to a lot of causes and organizations that I care about, and that's why what you do with the money is more interesting than, I mean, how you made it sort of interesting. What you do with it really speaks to the legacy piece even more so. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in The Soul of Money, Lynn Twist's book, which is really speaking to the idea of, money is energy, and what do you want to do with it is probably the better question.
Betsy, how does money play into your thinking about these issues, leadership, what makes an effective organization, all of that?
Yeah, well, for me, money, I never really thought about money, worried about money, because when you're in politics, when you're working in nonprofit organizations, academia, or a White House or a government agency, that you're not going to make a lot of money. I mean, you top out in $150,000, to be an executive director of a nonprofit organization. That's not a lot of money. So, I mean, to some people it is, of course, but speaking relatively to so for me, it wasn't until I turned 50 that I was like, wow, you don't really have, you spent your whole life kind of in government and nonprofit, so now I have some catch up to do. So my whole thing is, wow, okay, and then you have to shift the conversation, which is kind of what my keynote was about, was my worthiness to earn that money. Because you go in this field and you find out, wow, I'm totally underselling myself. I find out that my male colleague is making 5 times a speech than I am.
So part of your job has actually been to ask for more money. I mean, that's partly what makes it work for you.
You have to. And it's interesting, because when I was at the Kennedy School, when I left the Clinton years and I went to the Kennedy School to get my mid-career master's, I had this memory, 250 mid-career students, so the average age is 38, 40. And the question was, how many of you see yourself as are either currently or see yourself in the future as and I think they said multimillionaire or something. I happened to be sitting in the very back of the class, and I just put my hand up because, yeah, man, why not? Nobody in the class, like 250, there was 3 of us that raised our hands. And then for the rest of the year, people would say, oh, you're one of the ones that like it's bad. Right? So this mentality of I either do good or I make money. And there has to be this shift of I can do good and be able to take care of myself and my family and not worry about money. So that's a shift. And I think Lynn Twist's book and her work actually, in fact, that was one of the last conversations I had with Warren Bennis before he passed. He had discovered her. So to everyone in this audience who was a Warren Bennis follower, he just thought her work was amazing.
So Raj, let me turn to you. I mean, you talk all the time about conscious capitalism. Are there clear markers between, I guess, what we might call good capitalism as opposed to bad capitalism?
Well, of course, there are many. In terms of the relationship to money and profits, I think Chip expressed very well what I would have said too, is that it matters how you make the money. First of all, profit is a social good. I think it's socially irresponsible to run a business that does not generate an economic surplus, because the world needs that. Where do we get taxes? How do we invest in infrastructure and public health and education without, ultimately that wealth has to be created by somebody, and governments are not creating wealth. And certainly nonprofits are not meant to, but businesses have to create, which we can then deploy in society. So I think it's important for businesses to be profitable, but it matters greatly how you make the money. Because you can make a lot of money and then have a spectrum of negative side effects on people's health, on the environment, on all kinds of things, on society generally, on the future, on our kids. And that's not acceptable. That's really more, you're extracting value. And a great business, and I'll get into this in excruciating detail tomorrow.
What about the complaint of an awful lot of people when they look at salaries, particularly of CEOs, is they make astronomical salaries compared to the people at the bottom of the organizations. Is that a problem?
That is a problem. And that's where conscious businesses again are different. They pay their people at the front lines better than average. Costco pays double of Walmart. Right? Container Store pays double. And they provide great healthcare benefits. But their people at the top are paid much more modestly relative to their peers at other companies. Costco CEO Jim Sinegal used to get $300,000 a year, right? And that's like 5 times the average pay in the company. Whole Foods has a cap of 19 to 1. Now the typical public company is about 380 to 1, and Walmart might be 1,200 to 1, right? So these companies are addressing through voluntary action. This is not mandated by the government or anybody else, but they're saying there's a matter of internal equity, and they have a high degree of transparency as well, right? And also, when you use money as the only way to attract a leader, then you get a leader who primarily cares only about money.
Yeah.
And they're like a mercenary leader. They'll go anywhere where the money is high. They don't care about the purpose of your business. They don't care about the people. What we need are missionary leaders, not mercenary. And we also don't need the military-style leaders, right? So we've evolved from that. So we want leaders who actually care about other things. Now they're well paid and they can do pretty much anything they want in their lives.
What about those businesses you mentioned that pay more than Walmart, for instance? I mean, can they be competitive? I mean, I think there is this assumption that the reason why Walmart has been so successful is because they pay little and they sell products for cheap, and that's the ticket to success.
I would say by any measure, Costco is far more successful than Walmart right now. If you look at their stock price and what they've done for investors. So yeah, they pay their people double of Walmart and 60% higher than Sam's Club. Their sales per employee are 3 times higher. Right? Their employee turnover is 7%, Walmart's is 70%. So which means Walmart has to hire 1 million new people every year to replace the ones who left. And somebody mentioned the cost of right? And leave aside the productivity and all of that. And Jim Sinegal is very clear when he gets criticized, why do you have to pay your people above market? He said, I want my people to be able to lead a decent life and look after their family. So no more questions on that, And by the way, our sales per employee are 3 times higher. Our labor productivity is actually great. And our people actually are highly experienced and productive, So there's a wonderful book called The Good Job Strategy by a professor at MIT, Zeynep Ton. And she's looked at a bunch of companies that actually provide higher pay, better benefits, more predictable schedules, all the things that people would want, and showing how that then has operational advantages to the company in terms of efficiency, productivity, fewer stockouts, fewer errors, etc. Beyond the fact that these people are happier and healthier, their families are better off. So there is a very rational business case to be made of treating people well.
And one of the things that Bill said in his very introductory remarks at the beginning of the day, and quoting Wade Davis, was that it's business that is likely to be the agent of cultural transformation.
That's what Timothy Leary told me.
Okay.
It's a true story. For those of you who bought my book, chapter 2 of my book, I talk about my experience at my first motel, the Phoenix, sitting by the pool with Timothy Leary, who was a regular guest there because he was funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. And that's what, he said, he whispered to me, and he said, we've got to sort of come to a conclusion here that the business world is where the change is going to come from. So the business world needs to clean its act up.
Why is the business world where the change is going to come from?
Partly from his point of view, speaking for him for a moment, it was because the government will never get to a place where it's powerful enough unless it actually sort of takes over all the forms of production and consumption in the society. And he just said, listen, the U.S. is built for business. And he was speaking more about the U.S. And this was 25 years ago. So I can't speak for him there. What I can say is that Mahali Csikszentmihalyi said the same thing about the size of buildings. I think what I like to say is I actually think the biggest challenge for the business world in terms of its corrosive effect is not the environmental footprint, although that's pretty well documented. It's what I call the emotional fist print, which is not very well documented. And that is when someone is treated badly or is in that state of feeling depressed, anxious, and just horrible at work, and they take it home. And that's what we do. You take it home and you kick the dog, you ignore your child, you don't have relations with your spouse for months. These things happen as a result of work. And what we haven't done a very good job calculating is the emotional contagion of people in bad workplaces on their families and on their communities. There's a lot of evidence around it in places like Flint, Michigan, that have nothing to do with the water, that have everything to do with what the state of the psychohygiene is of a community when the productive resources in the community, the businesses, actually pull back. So I just think that's an interesting thing for us to look at and to understand what's the effect, that emotional fistprint effect. When I say fistprint, it means like you come home feeling like you got punched at work, and you feel that every day. So I would love to do more research on that.
Anyone else
Well,
want to weigh in here?
yeah, I have a book outside called Everybody Matters, which is very much about this very idea. They say Bob Chapman, the CEO of Barry Wehmiller, it's a company based in St. Louis. They have a lot of operations here in Wisconsin, actually. They bought 80 companies, never sold a single one, mostly struggling and dying, turned them all around, never laid off people. And it's all about caring for people as human beings, treating everybody as somebody's precious child, as he says, and recognizing that the way we lead impacts the way people live, and that the emotional contagion starts at work, positive or negative emotions convey. And they had lots of examples where people talked about, and I'm treated this way at work. I go home, I'm not nice to my wife, she doesn't talk to me, all this happens, And now I feel respected and cared for, and I do this, and I'm nice to my wife, and she talks to me. And Bob said, well, maybe we should look at the divorce rate as an indicator of success. But I think it is recognizing the broader response. The reason I agreed to do this book is that they took the idea of leadership further, because we thought conscious leadership meant you do amazing things between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday. And people are engaged and passionate and innovative. But its impacts also their family and their children and what happens there. There's a much greater sense of responsibility and stewardship.
I want to come back to this question of what business can do that other entities can't. What about nonprofits? I work in public radio. I've worked in the nonprofit sector my whole life. We have a wonderful university here in Wisconsin. I mean, what I hear you suggesting is the action is in the corporate world. It's not in this other sector. I'd like to tease out some of this. I mean, what can business do that these other institutions can't, or what is business less good at doing?
The thing that I see about business is that a CEO can say, I care about this and I'm going to do this, and they can do it, versus in government, a president, that's why I was saying earlier, like just because the president says I'm going to build a 20 million foot wall, you're actually not going to do that unless you get Congress to approve it. So so that's why in government it can be so frustrating, because it's not. It takes a village to get something passed, right? Where a CEO can say, this matters, we're taking on this issue, we're changing the way we do leadership development, I'm walking the talk of how we care for our people, i.e. Bob Chapman is a great example. And that's why I think that's where the change can happen, is right now in our world, where business, and nonprofit too, because you can have a nonprofit leader who can say, we're taking this issue on.
I think it's that, and I also think it's money. Back to your original question, there's just more money available in the business world, in the for-profit business world, to go solve problems. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. It's just sort of the way things are. And so, I mean, I also think that on some level there is a bit, I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble here. There's a little bit more of a Darwinian element to the business world that's less evident in education, nonprofits, and government. And what I mean by that is, while I don't think it's in any way, it's not always fair and it's not always accurate. There is a sense that in the business world, if you don't, over some period of time, prove your worth there as an organization, you may go away.
If you don't produce, you're going to be out.
Yeah.
Yeah, John?
I think the NGOs can work symbiotically, in different industries with business, and I see that a lot in the food sector. The reason why they're successful companies such as like Whole Foods or Native or otherwise, it's not necessarily just because of like our brilliant leadership, and we did this whole thing. Obviously, you need to run companies successfully to get to get to the next level. But it was a lot of people who helped build the whole awareness around organics, and the nonprofit like the Ecological Farming Group in California, and there's a group called Moses here in Wisconsin, and they educate farmers and teach people about this. They're a nonprofit, but if you don't have farmers growing organic, and you don't have consumers, conscious consumers, and the co-op movements and things doing it not necessarily because they want to make money, but because they believe in it, and they educate people, and people feel that connection, and then that can move markets. So I think it's important to have conscious consumers and co-ops and nonprofits that can help drive that.
But what I hear you all saying is, you do good in the business world, and you treat your employees well, and everyone will benefit. You'll make more money. Really? Isn't there a point where there are going to be choices between, there's you're going to make a little more profit, and you're going to do a little less of something else that we would consider good. Aren't there trade-offs here? I haven't heard any sense trade-offs.
Well, okay, I would dispute that you haven't heard anything like that, because at least I'll speak to my presentation today, and I think you were here. There was a trade-off in having our managers take 10 and 20% pay cuts, and choosing to make sure that we did not lay off people, even when we didn't have enough guests to actually keep housekeepers busy. So we sometimes had housekeepers do just long-term projects just so they could keep busy and do an 8-hour shift. That meant that our short-term profits were less, but it built a culture that actually was not fear-based, so that we could help our employees move up the pyramid, and so that long-term we actually were able, or even relatively short-term, gain market share. By gaining market share, we were able to become more profitable. So the point was not, okay, we just want to be profitable and this is the way to get there. It was very much, okay, how do we create an environment where we know we're going to, if we called ourselves joie de vivre, we've made a point that that's what we're trying to actually live up to. The collateral benefit that comes from it is a long-term profitable path. But I think you're using, I'm going to use Maslow, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. You have a perception on money that's quite a blunt instrument. I'm just going to be direct.
No, that's fine. Correct me.
I think you have a perspective on it that's quite blunt. It's not. There's so much more nuance when it comes to money. There's short-term profits. There's long-term profits. There's things that people do. People say, it's like when politicians talk about taxes. Tax policy has everything to do with innovation, where a company's going to be. Well, if that was true, California wouldn't be the innovation capital of the tech world. It's a very expensive place for taxes. People don't make decisions exclusively based upon money. And I think that for a lot of people, they sort of look at the business world from the outside and they say, oh, you do it just because of the money. And it's like, well, not really, actually. I worked for 4 years in a row out of business school for $2,000 a month. And that's what it took. But I wasn't doing it for the money. So.
Just for the record, I like money, but
okay.
I'm just not in a business that actually generates a lot.
You'd like to have more money, right?
Yeah.
But if I could speak, the idea of trade-offs, especially when you look at stakeholders, right? The traditional mental model about business is it's about profit, and profit is revenue minus cost, and it's pretty simple, right? Maximize profit, therefore you sell as much, charge as much, and then you minimize cost base, little. Squeeze your suppliers, externalize onto society, avoid taxes, etc., etc. But when you start to think about business as a living, interconnected, interdependent system of stakeholders, right, and you start to recognize that the well-being of each is tied in with the well-being of each other, all of them, and therefore you have to look for solutions and outcomes that are win-win. It's easy to make a trade-off based decision. It doesn't take a lot of creativity. But if you reject the trade-off, that's when you can engage human creativity. And human beings are infinitely creative. That's one thing we've learned. The one unlimited resource on this planet is human creativity. And more often than not, you can find a way to break that trade-off, certainly in the long term. Now, in the short term, you may have to do certain things, but that's simply investing in towards the long term. But in that system, if you have a trade-off mentality, one of the phrases I've been using recently, to get a win-win-win, you have to have a mindset of give, give, give. Everybody has to be a giver to that system, to the well-being of that system. And when that system grows and flourishes, you get a lot more back. Whereas if you're a taker, if you say, I've got a strong union and we're going to get the best, highest wages, and if customers are looking for the lowest price on every transaction, and the investors are looking for the highest return every quarter, etc., then everybody's taking from that system. It's like bleeding that system 5 ways. And ultimately it weakens and dies. So when you have that mentality, we're all together, we have a shared purpose, shared values, we're trying to achieve something here, and everybody's creating value in that system. Business is the ultimate value creation engine in the world. We can take a small amount of resources that individually don't amount to much and create extraordinary value out of that. Right? But if you don't align all these forces together, the amount of value we create is quite limited. Once you align them together, the amount of value can be extraordinarily high, much higher than we realized.
One of the through lines, and to change subjects a bit here, one of the through lines in a number of the talks has been the importance of showing vulnerability, especially on the part of leaders. And I know a couple of you shared some personal stories here, but I'd love to hear more about that. If there have been particular moments, times when it's like, ooh, do I really want to go there? But it was something that was difficult, but you went through that difficult process and you came out stronger on the other side. Personal stories is kind of what I'm looking for here. Betsy, do you want to?
So difficult story. Like
where you had to you had to do more than just project strength and that you were tough, and you had to show, it's like I'm struggling here, and you let other people around you see that, and somehow you came out stronger on the other end.
So,
Chip, you want to start?
Yeah, no, I have a good one there. So Betsy talked about Viktor Frankl, and so I was going through a very difficult time in 2008. I won't go through all the details, but both my business life was falling apart, my personal life was falling apart. I broke my ankle playing baseball. I got a bacterial infection in my leg. I got my leg amputated. And silly, amongst all of that, I was in St. Louis giving a speech on August 19th, 2008, on serious antibiotics that I was allergic to. I didn't know that. And I went flatline on stage.
on stage.
Yeah, at the end of the speech. So, long story short, because this is a pretty long story, so I'm going to keep it short. I ended up in a hospital that night after I went flatline 9 times, so they kept paddling me back to life. And I was in the hospital that night, and in my briefcase, I had Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because one of my best friends in my life was named Chip, and he was my insurance broker. He was really sort of like, he was just the guy who always cheered me up when I was not in a good place, and he committed suicide. He hung himself in a tree in front of his wife and 2 kids. So I was reading this book because I felt, we had the same name. I was the one telling him I was depressed. So I read the book, and I read this 3 sentences in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. In your response lies your growth and your freedom. So that night, I sketched out in the hospital, I didn't sleep much that night, an equation which was despair equals suffering minus meaning. Mm-hmm. Despair equals suffering minus meaning. That was distilling Viktor Frankl's book down to something that could be a mantra for me. Because if suffering is sort of constant, which is a very Buddhist point of view, if it's always there, but the other 2 are variables, the more meaning you have, the less despair you have. Mm-hmm. So long story short is, for the next 3 months, it was August of 19th, 2008, the economy didn't get any better between that time and when Obama was elected. My world was falling apart, but I started feeling better because the thing I started asking myself on a daily basis is, where's the meaning? What did I learn this week? And I'd go to the end of the week and say, what did I learn this week? So I ended up in November, 3 months later, most of the senior leaders in my company did not know I had a flatline experience. Just about 5 or 6 people did. And at the November annual retreat of our top 80 leaders, I got on stage and our company was falling apart. And my president and my head of HR, both who are women, came to me and said, you need to do the best cheerleading speech you've ever done in your life, Chip, because everybody is really scared. And they gave me a speech, and no one ever gives me a speech. I'd go do my own thing, but they said, this is what we want you to talk about. And right before I went on stage, I said, I'm not giving you a speech. And so I went up, and I went on stage, and I said, most of you don't know this, but I went flatline 3 months ago. And the thing I learned from it was despair equals suffering minus meaning. And for the next hour and a half, we're going to learn this equation. And we're going to learn actually how to find meaning in what's going to be a very difficult next couple of years. And we spent the next 90 minutes with lots of tears in the audience and the crowd. But we all of a sudden went from that place in our lives where we were silent and suffering to the place where we actually felt connected and suffering. Yeah. So thank you. And for me, it was just miraculous. It was that vulnerability and confidence at the same time. And it really came from Frankl. And it came from this feeling of like, no matter what's happening in your life, whether you're in a concentration camp or you literally, in my case, was in this concentration camp in my head of feeling handcuffed to work that I no longer wanted to do, but feeling an enormous amount of responsibility to all of the people in the company, being the founder, CEO, and all the investors, when I knew we're going into another recession, and this time I don't want to sit through it. It was about actually being honest about it, and we came together. So that's my story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have a story?
We're not Nobody's going to get a better story than that.
No.
Or not a story, but just sort of a particular situation you had to work through.
Well, this is something I'm learning a lot about. In the process of writing my last book, my co-author taught me something quite priceless. She said, vulnerability is an ability. It's right in the word, right? It's not a liability. And this whole notion that we have that we cannot be vulnerable, we cannot show emotion, is actually the opposite. I've seen, for example, at Southwest Airlines, one of the executives I know there, he was relating a story that he had come into a position and he had this team of people and they weren't gelled with each other and they really were operating at a very formal level and the team wasn't coming together. And then he stood up at one of their gatherings. He said, I have to tell you, I have to explain why I am the way I am. Sometimes I'm overly controlling. You might feel this way. But I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents and I had to be the adult in the household. And, he shared these really deeply personal things. And he had tears. And the next thing you know, each of the team members had their own story about being human and sharing that. And from that day on, that team just became an extraordinary team because now they were connected at a deep human level. So again, back to Barry Wehmiller, they say we measure our success in man tears. The first time I went there, I simply sat with groups of middle-aged blue-collar men, for the most part, working in these industrial manufacturing units. And I would ask them, tell me how it used to be and how it changed when this company got acquired by Barry Wehmiller. Before they could say a word, they would get choked up. I said, I've never seen so many men, again, middle-aged blue-collar men, crying. There's something powerful here that can move. And when we lose touch with that, we lose touch with our humanness, right? And when young boys are told, man up and don't cry, even when you're hurt, I think there's a wound that is created. And the masculine wound, that happened when you were a child, shows up much later in life as aggression and violence and all kinds of things, right? So I think we have to get back, especially for men, this idea that it's okay, and it's actually a sign of strength to be able to do that, along with the confidence. I think what you said today was important to me because I hadn't connected the two. Right? It cannot be just a sense of almost victimhood, because the other thing I heard from this woman named Edith Eva Eger, who's a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, 85 years old now, and she was at this conference last year I was at. And, she said we're all victims of victims. Okay, and our tormentors themselves were victimized by somebody else, and that somebody has to break the cycle of victimhood, and that takes consciousness to say, I'm not going to pass this along. And the second thing she said was that the biggest Nazi is inside us. This kind of goes to your point.
Mm-hmm.
We torment ourselves, we imprison ourselves. Right? So I think that kind of vulnerability is that's a kind of weakness that we have to get away from.
Well, yeah, John.
So the last little confession, the last couple months have been a hard time at Nativa. We had, early in the year, we found out about $30 million a year in business was walking out the door. It's going to happen in the next month for us, which is a big chunk of business. Bank wasn't too happy. It's like, okay, what are you going to do? And I remember sitting in our HR department, and I started crying. Because we're going to have to, we laid off 12 people, and we looked. It was very hard to see who we need to lay off, and we need to get our cost. We need to get our overhead. We have to right size the business, and talk about a compromise, and we haven't really had to do layoffs ever before. I mean, we're growing just gangbusters, and the industry has changed, and we did such a good job. We have, everybody and their brother competing with us, from private label retailers to a lot of different manufacturers, and everybody seems to come up with another jar of coconut oil, and so, and I was just to have to go through that step and to walk every day, and we weren't ready to announce it, and to know that we were going to do that, and be with the people who were going to be let go, and then being in the room when we let the people go, and what they were experiencing, was not a fun thing, and then I got together with our team after that, and I just said, I take responsibility. I'm the CEO. We missed some of our sales goals, and this is what's happened, and I apologize, and so that was hard. And one of the things that I've kind of learned, I had a mentor, because that passed on, Stan Russell, and one of the things he told me is, when you get in these kind of tough situations, you can just kind of focus on the problem, and or where we're going. And he kind of taught me is really important to visualize, just feel on an energetic level where you want to be. And so that's kind of how I shifted out of it on a personal level, the challenges we were facing, because never done this before, and it's obviously impacted 12 people working in the company. But I really looked at okay, here's how I see the business being successful. Here's what we need to do, and how does that feel inside? And tap into that. So it's when you get up in the morning, it's oh, these things are going to go wrong, this is going to go wrong. Instead of putting all your attention on that or checking on the email all the time, as many people do, but go into what's the outcome and how does that feel? And do you feel it throughout your whole body, or do you just feel it here? Or do you only feel it here? So that's one of the tools that I've used to when things look a little bleak. And we've almost gone out of business about 9 or 10 times. So,
what was the response from people in your company after you had these conversations?
Yeah, I mean the people who are still on the team.
Yeah.
The feedback was pretty positive, because I think one is they realized we just didn't go up and go, hey, things are all going to be good. We actually said, here's what we're going to do. Here's the numbers. Here's what we need to cut here. Here's what we need to grow here. Here's what we need to change. So we were really clear on what the plan was, and so yeah, we got feedback that they felt I think they felt also more safe, because when you do a layoff, it's well, who's else going to be next? There's that spiral concern. And also it doesn't hurt that we have these new products that are really exciting. We've been working on this last year that we're looking forward to help grow the sales in the future. But overall, it was positive. But you don't always know, because I always joke, if you want to learn something about a company, don't ask the CEO.
Betsy, do you have anything to add here?
So I think I was just sitting here thinking, when I made the decision to not go into an Obama administration, I made that decision based on love, because my little daughter at the time was in first grade, and I went to her parent-teacher conference with her dad, and the teacher said to us, "She's depressed. Maddie seems depressed, and she's kind of worried where you are," and and I just was like, I didn't see that in her. I didn't really see that she was depressed, but it was it was a long campaign, and I walked out of the of that evening. This was like October of '08, and I said to my husband, "I'm done. I can't do it. Maddie needs me, and I don't know. I'm done." And it just and so I was the only person in the whole senior team that didn't go into an administration job, and I was okay with it. It just felt that was the right thing to do. And I remember going to the inauguration. I went to one of the parties, and someone said to me, "So what's the job? What job are you getting?" And I said, I'm not. And I had no idea what I was going to do. So I was like, total ambiguity. And he said to me, I'll never forget this, he said, "Are you crazy? You've worked for 2 years. If you walk away 3 years from now, they won't remember your name." And I remember saying, "You know what? I'm okay with that, actually," because it's okay. And I left that inauguration. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I just stood in some ambiguity and said, "Universe, I want to make a contribution to the world in a different way around the leadership field, and where I can be present for my child." And so I think what I learned from that was, we don't have to have it all figured out. We think we have job to job, and what do you? And I remember sitting, I spent some long days thinking, well, okay, Bets, what's the contribution you can make, and how's it going to show up? And then 2 months later, I found myself in the offices of Simon & Schuster, and I'm getting a book deal. So, and that put me on a whole different trajectory. And I've never looked back. It was the best thing I ever did. And so one of the things I talk to people about is, it's okay to not have it all figured out, to go with your heart. And if you make decisions based on love, because I think that decision, ego would have been to turn my family upside down and move to Washington to take some job that works 90-hour a week. I already did that. And I was under no illusion of what that meant to your family. So we make decisions based on ego, so it's a decision based on love. And we had no money. I mean, that killed us, that campaign. Gave me 2 households up. I'm the breadwinner in my family. So, so it wasn't like I had this bank account that's like, oh, I can just kind of hang out for, it was like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Like, can we get through like February? And then, I don't know, and then I got this book deal, and it just put my whole life on a different trajectory. So being willing to sit in some ambiguity, that's the lesson.
But it also sounds like you had to do something in your life to create that space, to open up that space. I don't know how long you've been thinking about writing a book, but maybe.
It's interesting. People would say to me, "You should write a book," but I never saw myself as an author. Because first of all, I can't sit still for 5 minutes. and I'm also not able to, it's really hard for me. Like if I'm alone too long in the house, I have to go to Starbucks to get a coffee because I just have to see people. So, I'm off like an extrovert. I just got my Myers-Briggs done again. I'm like an extrovert, like 15, on a scale of 1 to 10. So that for me is really hard. So yeah, I can have a concept of writing a book, but actually writing a book, and when I was in 8th grade, I learned a little poem called, and the teacher, I'll never forget it, he said, he made us all stand up and say this little poem, because he said, this will be the one thing that gets in your way of life. I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how devoted you are. Procrastination is a crime. It will lead to sorrow. You could stop at any time. I bet you'll stop tomorrow. And I love that. So I never saw myself as an author, but of course, that's the thing about mentors and people that come in your life, because other people saw it. And Spencer Johnson, who I'd met through my work at Harvard, through Warren Bennis, he saw it in me. he said, you should write a book. And then he connected me to his agent. So it was like one of those things, right? And so it kind of all kind of happened. And I got my book deal. I'm not under no illusion. I got my book deal because Obama was hot. And I was coming off his campaign. So it wasn't like, oh, Betsy Myers is a famous person. It's like, wow, this woman's kind of had some interesting, and she's just off Obama, and wow. So that's kind of, and so I grabbed the opportunity because I knew, it's hot now, grab it. Right now? You think anyone could get a book contract right now about Obama? His campaigns? No. No, they could not. Yeah. So anyway, I think part of the fun of life is I don't have it all figured out, but I'm going to keep following my heart. And if I'm, I'm 55 years old. I don't really know what's next. I mean, I'm kind of going
When's your
to
birthday?
August 21st.
Oh, you're
When are you?
October 31st.
I'm older than you.
Barely.
Are you 60? 1960?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. See, I knew I liked you. Whenever I meet people who are born my same year, I'm so happy. Because you're a really cool guy. So it's like, okay, there's other 55-year-olds, right? Anyways, so that's my thing. It's like, just be in ambiguity, follow your heart, follow your love, make decisions for your family that are the right decisions for your family, and the universe will take care of you. That's kind of what I believe.
It's beautiful.
So maybe I'll get a second book out of this. I don't know. Who knows? If it's meant to be, right?
I think this is a perfect time to throw it open to questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
We survived you. We survived you.
So anyway, raise your hand, and remember you have to wait for the mic. So let's go to right in the middle there.
So we're social animals, right? All the evidence suggests that our behavioral tool set evolved and was perhaps perfected 20,000 years ago, sometime in the past. And that system was designed to support a community of people living together. We find ourselves today in the most individualistic society ever created. And a lot of our contact with business is through what? Advertising. And what does it say? You're an individual. It's preaching self-actualization through accumulation, right? And hearing the talks today has been very exciting to me because I'm seeing business leaders who are beginning the arduous task of changing our values. And the hope is, they can play a role in changing values more to values more appropriate for social animals and to respect our needs. I mean, that's what I'm hearing about successful businesses that respect their employees as real people and provide for them. And so I'd like to hear your comments about, is there potential to really change our values as a country away from individualism? Is that just a dream? Because that seems to be eating us alive, I think.
So I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. He's written a book called Tribes, and so that's one of the things that I and my company tries to kind of. We call ourselves a tribe, not all the time, but we have a thing called Tribal Thursday, and one of the things we're doing to help our team is we have a core challenge. I've kind of been like going into some people's offices and saying, just imagine if you could just do the plank like every day for like 3 weeks. What would that do? And so I kind of bugged and kind of picked on a few people, and then after a while we decided we made it into a competition. So we just started it last week, and everybody timed themselves on doing a yoga plank, and we picked some teams and stuff. So that's some of the things we're kind of doing inside our company. But also, there's different people who are in our sector who like are our customers, who are allies or nonprofits, and we really feel we feel connected, and so it's kind of like where is your tribe, and how to find that. I think that's important. But but yeah, I think this individuality, and in America, 350 million individuals is a challenge, and that collective, I think it's like 10,000, 20,000 years ago, we weren't necessarily just one or just a single family. It was a tribe or a group, and how we do that, I think, is important. I think we're learning about that, though.
Yes, let's go there. Kelly?
It seems if there's a theme, all of you are using the construct of business as a framework for personal development. And so I'm really curious what your developmental edge is, what it is that you're personally working on in your current endeavors, and what you wish to see in yourself actualized as a human being.
So,
Wow. Yeah.
So it's unfortunately, it sounds like the opposite of the question that just asked. For me, it's boundaries, personal boundaries. How there's really two particular places in my life. One is Airbnb. How do I create boundaries there? It's a company that has, I was supposed to be 8 hours a week, then 15 hours a week, then 60 hours a week, and I'm trying to actually ratchet it back a little bit. And it's a 365-day a year. There's 1 million people staying in someone's house tonight somewhere in the world, and shit's gonna happen. I mean, stuff happens all day long, all night long. Things are gonna happen. So there's a boundary issue, and then I've got a foster son who's 39 years old and who's very troubled and is emotionally abusive in a lot of different ways. And I'm the only person left in his life, for sure. And so how do I create the boundary there that is loving to him but also sanity producing for me? So yeah, so I would say, how do I create a spacious and free life that allows me to make a difference out there but refuel my batteries? Because my challenge is always draining myself and then feeling like, okay, I have to have a flatline experience for me to literally have divine intervention come in and say, okay, have you learned yet? So, yeah.
So I would say for me, I'm working on my kind of obsession of my business and being all-consuming, and then also the work that I do in the nonprofit world to change the food system, and shifting some of that and spending more conscious time in nature. I just recently purchased some land, so I'm working on which varieties of trees I want to be growing, and shoveling manure and picking weeds, and so that's my and it's kind of my dad retired and went from being in the building business to being more on the land. He did that in around 60, so and I think he got a lot of happiness out of that. So I'm kind of trying to spend a little less time on the computers and looking to create more balance and using something that I enjoy, being around nature and trees, and learning that as a different skill set than running a company and on social media all the time.
God, so much, right? So I'm, all of us, I don't know if you guys would agree with this, but I think there's something about us that are in this leadership business speaking books that we are students of the work that we're teaching. So I come to you today as a student, as much as I am a teacher. So I'm walking this, living it in my own life, and life throws us stuff, and we're forced to look at our relationships, our work. And so this year for me is a real year both looking at my personal life and my business life. And for me, the biggest thing of this worthiness, this self-love that I was talking about, I'm actually, honestly, in January, I was I literally was sitting on the couch in my house going, what is self-love? Like, do I do it? Do I live it? And I have a almost 14-year-old daughter, only child, who I'm mirroring for. She's watching me. So I have to tell just one quick little story that happened recently, okay? I don't know why, but there's something about, in my journey, I take care of everyone else before I take care of me. So, right? So everyone else has got the new car or the new computer, and I've got the old computer and the old car.
Right.
And so I've had this old couple years. I usually lease cars, but a couple years ago, my lease was up on my Lexus, and I was in Washington, and my sister said, "Hey, I have this Mercedes, old, like 2002." She goes, and she's quite well off, and she's like, "Do you want it? I'll sell it to you for $1." So I'm like, "Okay, right?" So I had this old car, and it's funny because in Boston, like in LA, when I lived in LA, everybody cares about cars, right? But in Boston, like cars aren't like a status symbol so much. And so I had this car, I didn't drive it that much, and it's old, 13 years old, and my dogs are in it, and I just didn't care that much about it. But it bugged my daughter. She's like, "Mom, you cannot have a car like that. Like, it's just not you. It's not, you need to take care of you." My daughter's talking to me like this. Like, you have to, why do you not have a nice car? And it's embarrassing. Well, when your kid's 13, everything's embarrassing. And like, so embarrassed. And then it started having this sound coming out of the heater that was like this. And so it became an issue. And then I started thinking, why don't I can afford to get a new car. So her spring break was 2 weeks ago, and we're out shopping, and she's totally bitching at me about my car. I go, "That's it. We're going to the Lexus dealer tonight," right? So we go to the Lexus dealer, and we walk in, and I go, "Well, no, we're just looking. We're not going to buy a car." But I walked out with a car, with a brand new Lexus. But anyways, it was a huge step for me on this journey, because it's about, why am I not worthy to have a nice car, right? What is that about? And why can't I buy myself something that's over $100? Right? So that's what I'm working on. And mirroring that self-care, worthiness for my daughter. That's my journey.
Raj, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I'm realizing and working on is not only do we have a right to be happy, we almost have a duty to try to be happy. And that thought was triggered a couple of years ago. I was at an event in Aspen, and a guy came in late to the meeting, and he said, "Sorry, my kids are going through all kinds of trauma, and I had to deal with these emergencies." He said, "You're only as happy as your least happy child." And all of us parents could immediately, of course, relate to that, right? I mean, when your daughter says she's depressed, or the teacher, that's like heartbreaking. And your response to that could be that you're down there with them, right? I mean, oh my God, how can I be happy if my child is not happy? You almost feel guilty for feeling happy. And if you think about it, you're not helping anybody by not being happy, right? And so you have to make almost a conscious effort to, of course, recognize, I mean, we're all extraordinarily blessed, and we have so many amazing, we get to come to places like these and meet people like this and do all these things. And yeah, there are things in our life, but unless we make a conscious effort to try and recognize all those beautiful things and maintain a level of happiness, we cannot lift anybody up. So you can't give what you don't have, so you cannot lift anybody. So I think that's one of the things I'm learning. And John Mackey also helped me with that, because he sort of pointed this out. He said there's an ethical, moral duty almost to try and be happy, right? And that's how you lift yourself up. The other thing I think is kind of what Chips was saying as well. And I have this misconception that if you are living your calling in your work, that you cannot get burnt out, because you're connected to the source, right? And you're an inexhaustible source of energy there. And I was disabused of that not long ago, right? My students actually did a project in my Conscious Capitalism course. They found there's a higher incidence of burnout among people who are living a calling, because they get so singularly focused and they lose balance. We had Tony Schwartz, who actually wrote The Art of the Deal. Okay, Donald Trump's book is written by Tony Schwartz, who used to be a New York Times reporter. Just as an aside, the book became a huge bestseller. He felt so sullied by the experience that he actually had to quit and take 3 years off and write a book called Searching for Wisdom in America. But anyway, Tony does this thing called the energy audit. So you look at physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual And I found for me the spiritual element was very high because meaning and purpose, right, in the work. But the other three are being ignored, you know. So achieving that balance and finding time to make that happen, I think that is important. So that's what I'm working on, not very successfully so far. But,
But you're conscious of it, so that's. Yeah.
We have more questions, but we have no more time. But we have a reception coming up. So thank you
Yeah.
to our panelists, and thank you to all of you.